Anyway, it's good to see you all. The scripture this morning, we're continuing one thing, comes from the account of Jesus healing a blind man. And it begins with the disciples asking Jesus a question. Who sinned, this man or his relatives, the generations before him, that he was born blind? They believed that such things could possibly, wasn't always, but could possibly be punishment for sin. Generational sin, sin inherited, or his own sin. However, his own sin would be a bit of a stretch because he was born blind. The question has some just real flaws in it to begin with. But Jesus says neither. This is not because of sin. This is to show the glory of God. An announcement in the Gospel of John that we have another sign of events. And he heals the blind man. And what happens after he heals the blind man is that the blind man is, in the terms of those days, was arrested and put on trial. They interrogate him. Who was this man, that healed you? And the interrogation does not go well. They don't believe that he was actually born blind, but he was. They call on his parents. His parents, in effect, don't stand by him. They give him up to the authorities. He's abandoned not only by his church and his friends, but also by his family. Now, this whole sign event is about how faith grows in us, faith in Jesus, and how that same faith can grow in us even if our lives might be falling apart. This man's life, after he was healed by Jesus, started to fall apart. His church, his friends, his family, all turned against him. He kept making some testimony. At first it was, all I know is this verse here. Let's read it. Not John 9:25. Here's what he said. They said, he was a sinner. How could he heal you? He's not of God. And the blind man replied, whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. That's the one thing. He is left completely and totally alone. And then Jesus comes to him again. It says, when Jesus heals him, he kind of exits from the scene, but he returns. And at this point, the blind man confronts the Jesus that healed him. And not only now is he healed physically, but also spiritually. For he then says, Jesus encounters him, and in that very personal encounter, he says, my Lord, my God. He comes to a complete and full statement of faith and a personal encounter with Jesus. One thing. Faith through an encounter with Jesus. It's been quite a week. Yesterday was a solemn day. I went to the courthouse at 7:30, listened to the reading of the accounts of September 11th, 2001. It's hard to believe that 21 years have already passed. Probably the most, I don't know what you would call it, traumatic terrorist events in modern times, it has to be, None of us thought that it was possible. It seemed surreal, like a movie that was being made. 9/11 has changed us. It has changed our country. And not always in good ways. Of course, it was intended to do evil. So if evil or if bad consequences result, that shouldn't be a surprise. And they have. We've lost a lot of personal freedoms. For instance, going to the airport. The Fourth Amendment of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights guarantees that we are protected from unreasonable searches and seizures. What happens to you when you go to the airport? Now, you practically have to completely disrobe. They can x-ray you completely. They can search your bags. They don't need a warrant. There apparently is some kind of universal warrant in the American Defense Act that was passed that allows TSA to thoroughly search your baggages and your personages, your person. Let's get that straight. Your person before you get on a plane. And we all complain about it, but no one's filed cases that have survived any court's decision about it. It is completely a violation of the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. And it's just common practice. That's just one of the things that in the course of the last 20 years that we have lost as rights. I think that the consequence most severe of 9/11 is that we have become distrustful. We have become cynical. Cynicism is considered the only appropriate attitude toward the world today in many circles. You know, if you believe and are optimistic, you're naive. Because the world is filled with, anything can happen to us at any time. We were protected on our shores, but here, look at this. And even more so than Pearl Harbor. That was the first sign that we were not so safe in America from foreign invaders and enemies. They hit us, but they hit us thousands of miles away and what at that time was one of our territories, not the states. Now, 9/11, they hit us right here in our homeland, in our largest city. And how did we not know or see that they were coming? After all, there had been that bombing, was it 96 or 93?
93.
There had been that bombing in 93, and they tried to take out the World Trade Tower then. Did we not up our vigilance at that point? We were an open and free society. Those hijackers walked onto those planes with box cutters and knives in their backpacks that they carried on. At that time, no search, no seizure, none of this. Since that time, we have developed this attitude of cynicism, distrust, and we have had to sacrifice some of our rights in order for us to be safe. Democracy dies in darkness is a phrase I've seen. And the darkness is that we're willing to trade our freedom for our security. And yet we're cynical about trusting anybody or anything. What I see today is so much distrust of government. Probably a good reason. I'm not here to argue that point with anybody today, because I don't really trust government having solutions for us anymore. But that's not the point that I think is important for us to consider at this moment. It's that we distrust so much, and it's had a negative effect on us. And of all the things in our time that we need so desperately to find anew, consideration and concern for one another, less selfishness, more sense of the needs of the whole of the community. The thing I think uppermost that we need to reacquire in our time is faith and trust in something. Cynicism is not doing us any good. And that's why this negative cynicism and paranoia that there's a lot of conspiracies out there and everybody's hiding everything from us. It may be true. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean it isn't true. But at the point that we just succumb to our fear and our paranoia, and we have no faith and trust in anything greater than ourselves, we end up in a very bad situation. Look what happened in the case of the blind man. In the case of the blind man, they brought him to the Pharisees. Now, it does not say who brought him, but somebody brought him to the Pharisees. Now, it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he received his sight. He said, he put mud on my eyes that I washed, and now I see. The first response, not trust, but distrust. Not affirmation and celebration of a man who was blind but now could see, but this statement. This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath. They were afraid. They were afraid of anything of what Jesus represented, because they lived under the yoke of oppression. And there have been too many zealots that had risen up to try to overthrow the power of Rome. And every time a new person came along, and this person had any of the so-called signs of the Messiah, they began to be afraid. It happened. In Jesus' own time, when he was a little boy in Nazareth, Pilate crucified 2,000 zealots and lined the roads throughout Palestine with them, because they had tried an insurrection against the Roman government. Now, that's very, very brutal. We lost 2,977, 78 persons on 9/11. Imagine seeing the roadsides lined with 2,000 crosses and people dying horrible deaths, all inflicted by the Roman government. They were afraid of Jesus. They were suspicious of Jesus. They imagined the consequences if they allowed Jesus to continue. Same as us today. If we don't have security and protection, we could suffer another 9/11. And what would that be like? This was horrible enough. We're wondering when the next 9/11 is going to come, where it's going to be, who's going to be the victims, suffragettes. If they can get a plane and fly it into the World Trade Center, what could they do with a football stadium or a baseball arena and the massive number of people that are gathered there for games? What could they do on any? And what if they ever got a hold of nuclear power? Those kind of fears have been with us ever since 9/11, 2001. We're kind of like the Pharisees in our time. Let's test everything. Be suspicious of everything. If any rule is broken, let's point out the rule breaker. The cancel culture says, let's get rid of it. Get them out. There's so much of that these days. Freedom of speech. Freedom of speech. Oh my goodness. It's like it's just gone by the wayside in so many instances. So we're kind of like the same situation with the blind man. So they said to him that the Pharisees said, this man's not from God. He does not observe the Sabbath. That would have been, well, he'd have been from God if he believes like we believe, if he acts like we think he should act. There's a lot of that going on around today. He cannot obviously be from God. How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs? And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, what do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened. He said, he is a prophet. See, the blind man does not say this is the Lord and Savior at this point. He says he's a prophet. Who else could do such things? Only by the power of God could a man be born blind, be given his sight. The Jews did not believe that he had been born blind and had received his sight. So they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? Well, the parents replied, we know this is our son. We know that he is born blind. He was born blind. But we do not know how it is that he sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He's of age. He will speak for himself. The parents said this because they were afraid of the authorities. Because the authorities who had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Excuse me. Fear, trial, interrogation. It sounds so familiar. And the end result is that distrust, cynicism, suspicion, and fear have driven out faith. And consequently, there's no fear. There's no salvation for them. If faith is driven out completely, there is nothing of salvation. Thank you. I was getting distracted with coffee. Thanks, Mark. Oh boy, that's pretty cool. Thank you. What is one thing we need to recover faith? To recover trust? We've been talking about the one thing: obedience, surrender, sacrifice, faith, and trust. Those are the only things that are going to heal us. How can we trust, you say? There are terrorists still out there. And in a monumental mistiming of action, in my view, we have left the place we first went to war to try to stem the tide of terrorism, and it's now back in the hands of the one who brought us 9/11. And I think we're all a little nervous about that. We're all just a little nervous about that. Can God save us and keep us, protect us from that? Will He? Yes. I believe, like the blind man, as his emotional and spiritual situation progressed or declined, actually, I don't think I'd use the word progress, as his spiritual and emotional situation declined, as his support systems evaporated, as his family, friends, and church betrayed him or abandoned him. As all of these things happened, he came to a greater awareness of who Jesus was. First, he started out saying he was a prophet, but when all these things started to happen, his faith started to grow. The same thing, I think, is happening to us today. God is working in our midst. We must not miss the signs that God is working, like the Pharisees did. That's the first element of faith and trust. We must look intently for where God is doing something in our time to deliver and heal, just as Jesus delivered and healed the blind man, because God did not come into the world to condemn the world, but that the world might be saved through him. That's what we must look for, all those signs of where God is working, what God is doing, and we celebrate and lift those up and bring others to faith and call them to believe and have trust in what God is doing in our present time. We know what Satan's doing, but Satan does not have the power. Satan will not deliver us. Satan will not heal us. Satan will not make everything whole again. Satan will not turn an upside down kingdom right side up as it should be. Satan will not be the one to save America. It has to be the work of the Almighty that created us that will save America, the world, all of us. And we must look for the signs of where God is working. That's the one thing. This blind man started out saying, knowing only one thing. I was blind, now I can see. But as he lost all the love and support he formerly had when he was blind, and that's always the irony of it, it still is true that sometimes family and friends prefer someone who's sick. They like it. I learned this early on in ministry. We got a man into alcohol treatment. He had been abusing his wife. His job was in jeopardy. You have an alcohol problem. I don't have an alcohol problem. I can control it, really. Because your relationships, your job, and your friendships and everything else are suffering because of your drinking, and you are not stopping. We reasoned with him, we talked to him, we prayed for him. Eventually he agreed that he had a problem, and he went to treatment. And his wife, who celebrated his going to treatment, the 30 days he was in treatment, her whole attitude changed. The minute he got out of treatment, she bought a bottle of scotch to celebrate in heaven. She liked him sick better than well. If there's any sense we want a sick America instead of a whole and powerful America, there's something wrong with that. We need to be strong in our democratic values. We need a world that is healed, an upside down kingdom set right side up. I don't see how any of that's going to happen, Chip, to the power of Almighty God. And I tell you, He is working today. Let us look for the signs of it. Where is He healing our blindness? Where is He taking us to new possibilities? Where is He raising up a new thing in our midst? Where is His light breaking through all of the darkness? Let's look for it. I'm not talking about looking for the good stories out there. There's many of them, and I appreciate that. I listened to a news on the morning now. I've started listening to this because they have stories of good things, good news stories. And I like that. I really do appreciate that. I think it's healthy, and I think it's good for us to hear good news stories. And it is part of the sign that God is still working in our world. That's a good thing. It's part of a sign that the light is greater than all the darkness that is around us. That is a good thing. But we're going to need more. We're going to need Jesus standing right before us and remembering how He has healed us, how He has been in our lives for so many years and brought us to new and better places, watched over and protected us, guarded us against evils, led us away from temptation, delivered us to good life and health and strength and confidence. We've got to remember how Jesus has been in our life and celebrate that and trust that God is working today in everywhere. And then if we trust in Him, we will be blessed and protected. It's the only thing in our time that I think will carry us through. I cannot guarantee you that there will not be another 9/11. I do recall I watched a few things yesterday that were very hard to watch because it was the stories of, I think, when Charles, some others, I forgot. Anyway, they started with the children who were born 9/11 or shortly thereafter. Their mothers were pregnant, their fathers were lost in the collapse of the towers. And they followed them this 20 years, and they've interviewed them 20 years later to see how their life has been and how 9/11 affected them. And those were really good stories. They never knew their fathers. And there were 60-some of them, I think. They never knew their fathers. But their fathers were towering presences in their life. And they have gone on, dedicated, devoted to making the world better. One of them, his father was what they called the Iron Man because he carried the heavy tools like axes and pry bars that they needed to bust open doors when they couldn't get in. And he climbed up 48 floors before he was overcome, trying to rescue people. His son is now doing the same job and has dedicated every day of his life to serving and protecting people like his father. And all that darkness, there's tremendous light. Tremendous light. God is alive and working in our world. There's a renewal of hope and vision going on today. Let's find it and celebrate it. And let all those with a negative word and cynicism and constant complaining and whining about how awful things are, let them go out there and find the God who is alive and well and loving and powerful and merciful and gracious and who is the light in every darkness. Amen.